I've been drawn into the world of testing not because I have a testing background. I've always been strongly aware of it ever since ICI, which was the multinational mentioned there, made me Group Vice President of IT in the early 90s. And I inherited a very large IT team, and obviously we had a lot of testers there, so I've always understood testing. But I've only recently been drawn back into it, courtesy of Geoff in good part, and some work he and I did together in Experimentus, and more recently by becoming involved with the TMMI Foundation. But let me start with an artistic word, landscapes. What I'm finding is that if you go into the world of industry, everybody's getting very confused at this big set of changes coming through, amongst other things, called the cloud. And they're getting even more confused because the marketing folk are making it more confusing by basically labeling anything that moves as the cloud and not explaining what the cloud is about. What I've been doing with my clients is to say that there's a process going on which is the process of virtualization. And I explain to them the roots of that. And that the best way to begin to grapple with its impact in your neck of the woods is to see it in terms of the three landscapes that make our industry. There's the landscape of how technology gets delivered. There's the landscape of how the vendors work in their own landscape of competition and services and contracts and things. And there's a landscape of how the user side, the enterprise, the government, make use of these capabilities. Because in fact, virtualization is shifting the groundwork in all three of those landscapes. In the how IT gets delivered, you've got the emergence of these where you can standardize and automate. You've got the emergence of these massive great service factories, highly automated, highly low cost of operation, highly flexible. In the vendor landscape, you've got the emergence of new vendors who use the service factories. You've got the emergence of new business models. I use and pay, use on demand, pay as you use and things like that. Replacement of long 5-year contracts with, Amazon Elastic Cloud. I'll have so much of that, then I'll stop using it and do something else. And then you've got the whole landscape of the user side, the enterprise or the government, where you've got all the issues of how do we take this large legacy, highly integrated, lumbering stuff and we begin to convert it into something that's more flexible, agile, able to use the capabilities of there. So if you look at this world in terms of those three landscapes and understand each of them in their turn, you actually begin to get a better feeling, depending where you're positioned as a business, how things might begin to go. So I find that useful. One thing has then become very clear to me that there is a fourth landscape, and that is the landscape of testing, because testing has grown up very much in the context of the world as she was before the great sudden surge of virtualization shifting all the other landscapes. So you have to begin asking how the landscape of testing itself is beginning to rework and be reformed and respond to all these other changes that are moving the other three landscapes. At the root of it, people, process and technology is how you create value with the capabilities of modern IT. Virtualization is shifting the balance between people, process and technology, because all three of them and how they're expressed is shifting quite radically. Back to those three landscapes and asking yourself in each of them how it shifts. And therefore, not surprisingly, how you do and how you set about and how testing delivers is also shifting. And I think what really came out of the discussions that Geoff and I had was that one of the things that I respect the TMMI structure for is that it promises to provide a method that allows you to look at, is the testing processes efficient and effective? But the big question it then raises is, are all those testing processes the right ones for the environment and things you're doing? So in other words, you can have a method, a tool that allows you to say, is this effective and efficient? But you're left with a broader question of, are we doing the right things in the right way, where is it going? And it's very clear to me, if you look at those three changing landscapes, that very clearly the landscape of testing is having to shift very fast and strong itself. You can begin to see some of the changes coming through. There's a beginning of a tendency to bring testing very much more into the process of setting requirements, realize that you can't just set requirements in isolation from. You've got the move towards agile, in other words, allowing you to move faster in creation of new capabilities and systems, and you've got to integrate testing into that. And I would then argue, as we get into the world of the really virtual, you've got to be able to create systems that are going to be able to be run in a totally virtual environment where you can't easily predict how the underpinnings of that virtual environment will work, the underlying infrastructural services and shifts will change, how it's going to interface increasingly automatically through standards and things like that, and testing has to begin addressing all of those. And that led to a bit of a debate between Geoff and myself that said, what is testing really about? Because in its very roots, testing obviously was, well, we want the software to be absolutely correct to work and deliver these requirements. And Geoff and I came to the conclusion, I think, that really increasingly what testing was about was a quality assurance process. And it was assurance of the ability to have confidence in outcomes. In other words, what testing is a very much broader approach that says if you're setting out to create something new or something different, you will have confidence in the outcomes. Now, when I then begin working away at that confidence in outcomes, I say to myself, how does one begin to understand the interlinkages of all the different parts that begin to come together so that testing can begin to see that it's doing the right things, going back to my point about the TMMI method. The TMMI method measures very effectively efficiency and effectiveness, but it still leaves open the question of all the right things being done, etc. And it was that point that it struck me that there was almost a gaping hole which I recognized from my life in the world of art. I'm not an artist myself, but my wife and I are small-scale collectors of contemporary art. We've always been involved in the scene. I chaired the trustees of an arts institution. Anybody know Hastings and Eastbourne well, that part of the world? Bexhill-on-Sea, anybody know Bexhill-on-Sea? The Delaware Pavilion, which gets a fair amount of publicity in television. I chaired the trustees there for between 2002 and 2008, when we took a failing institution with art galleries and things like that from under the local council, and we raised £10 million and we put it back on its feet. And it's firing away on all cylinders now, I'm glad to say, as a not-for-profit social enterprise. And that tied in with my work, and I now chair an artist-based institution in Islington called Qubit Artists. And one of the interesting things in Qubit Artists, which is what really led me to this line of thinking, is that it's a cooperative of 32 artists. But one of the extra things it has a gallery space that's about the size of this room. And we have a bursary. And the winner of the bursary gets 18 months as a young curator to prove their ability to curate. In other words, they have the ability to bring together artists, so they're not allowed to use any of the artists in Qubit Artists themselves, but they have the freedom and the budget to bring together artists and create shows. And that's really what curators are about. They are the people who assemble the talent, but they assemble it towards certain ends. And you can begin to see in project management, program directors, project directors, you can see the analogies with the work of curators. They are the people who have a very clear view of what the outcomes are intended to be, and you build from experience your knowledge of working with the artists. And they play a very important role in helping develop the artists and the interactions between the artists going forward. So you can see in the world of ICT the analogy with curators. But in the world of art, we have another character called the capital C critic. Now, the critic plays a very different role. The critic is someone who has a very deep understanding of the formal processes, the frameworks, and the thinkings of how these things should be working, and is continuing developing it, and observes the work of the artists and the creators with a very critical eye. They're the people who stand at the high level and observe the whole scene and are able to articulate that's heading in a wrong direction, or that isn't working, or this really needs to be better done. And I look around in the world of ICT and testing, and I say, we don't really have critics, and the terms I would use them there. We have lots of analysts. We sometimes have some very critical analysts, but we don't have critics in a capital C, people who can look over the whole landscape and say, this is where the changes are beginning to happen, this is how it's fitting together, have you noticed that? this is going down the wrong track and this is how to fit together. So my proposal for my short presentation this evening is that what I think the world of art, the visual arts, can teach the world of testing is that at this time when we're going to have to redraw the whole landscape of the testing process in order to fit the new worlds of the shift in the production of the operation of the technology landscape, the way that vendors work, the way that the users and the customers work. As we alter all of that, the landscape of testing is going to have to be changed. TMMI, in my view, provides a very strong method to say efficiency and effectiveness, but doesn't provide the means to say, and is the overall shape right? Is the overall approach right? And that's where I think we're going to need to generate our own generation of capital C critics, people who can take a high view, a real understanding of what's going on, and provide a very clear analysis of when that's getting on the right track and when it's going on the right track. And that's the only way we'll be able to redraw the landscape of testing over the next 5 to 10 years. Proposal for debate. I'm afraid I can't be here for the drink in the bar later, so you'll have to corner me at EuroSTAR or some other time. But hopefully that made some sense and was helpful.